You're watching TelecomTV's exclusive coverage of the ETSI NFV number 9 meeting here in Prague in the Czech Republic. And I'm joined now by Stephen Teitzel, who is Global Solutions Executive at IBM Telecommunications Industry. Stephen, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us today. Can we start by just having a recap of where we are with NFV and IBM's perspective, and where is the development of the standard?
Well, I think it's an exciting place right now because what we're seeing is this collision of IT and network taking place. And where in the past you've seen that take a long time, where people talk about things for a number of months or years, this one has really moved forward fast. And so what we're seeing now is not just conversation, not just possibilities, but over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of actual proof of concepts beginning to come out. And we're seeing the world of cloud now applied to the world of the network coming together in a really unique way, right, to drive capabilities for the service providers.
So when we talk about service providers, this group was started by the service providers requirement. We talk a lot about interoperability and cooperation between vendors. Are we still seeing that same level of openness and collaboration between service providers as they help develop NFV, and also as they start sharing their best practices?
Well, I think that's been the thing that was unique about this. When it was started by the service provider. It's kind of like, a band of service providers came together and said, we can't endure this kind of cost increase all the time, continually going up. And they needed to figure out a way to take radical cost out. And they did that, right, by looking at applying this whole world of cloud technology. Now, what's interesting is when you take that group as a steering committee and continue to move forward, all of a sudden it created almost like a shudder throughout the industry of, there's something different here, right? This is a different approach. This isn't just people talking about how do we, pass data from one person to another. This is about how we develop something together to go after a problem that was, taking out cost because of the competition that they were having with the over-the-top provider. I think that competitive environment still pushes them to have to work together, which is what is so unusual about this process, right? It's not a nice, casual, let's figure out how to shake hands. It's how do we learn to survive together? And that's what's causing that to occur. And that's why I see the collaboration between the service providers continuing today. Not only in the conversations here, at meetings like this or in the working groups in between, but literally in the POC process itself, right, as they begin to put development efforts together in their labs, right, beginning to work together in those ways. So I see a lot of cooperation going on.
Certainly in Europe, we're starting to see some consolidation amongst service providers. It doesn't extend everywhere, but there are signs in Europe that it's a trend, and it may continue a little bit longer. If this were to happen, is this going to reduce the requirement for NFV and new services as competition becomes less rigorous in domestic markets, or will it have no effect?
No, and I don't think it's going to reduce the focus on NFV. I think, though, that it could open up new doors of competition that haven't occurred before. Because while you have consolidation possibly going on within markets, all of a sudden the possibility of the cloud, the reach of the cloud, the ability to spin up new entities to expand, because now I'm doing network functions on a cloud-based environment, open up new possibility for global players to come into new markets, right, at a relatively low cost. So the competition, the competitive angle of that is still there, that is forcing them to, number one, have to put this program in place to be able to reduce the cost to drive the innovation. Because remember, that was another piece of this whole discussion when it first came about, was how do we drive innovation faster? I think that pressure is going to be there because they've got now the global competition coming in that's going to cause that to continue on.
And do you think the industry fully recognises how NFV will extend across all aspects of telecoms networks? Because whatever you're in, mobile, fixed, IoT, it's going to have a big part.
If anybody says they understand it completely, they don't, right? Because that's how radical this shift is, right? It's, we understand the first blush of it, right? We understand the first impact of it. We understand the cloud environment. But all of a sudden, we're beginning to talk about new business models that haven't existed before. What happens when a telco says, well, I don't need to be in the line business, I just need to be in this business of the services. And all of a sudden, they can shift and expand rapidly in a cloud environment. You have new entrants, right? MVNOs that can come in and for a relatively low cost enter into new markets, right? You have service providers that can, in essence, in new markets, pretend they're an MVNO. So it's going to create a whole new dynamic here that we haven't seen.
And can service providers roll out virtualized network functions on existing legacy equipment and architectures, or will it require more CapEx, more OpEx?
You know, what's interesting is this is not an all or nothing play. And what we're seeing is yes, you lay the foundation in, right? You lay the foundation in of cloud. You begin to then pick and choose those services or functions that you want to deploy upon that environment. And you can determine whether or not you first want to go after, you know, the CPE environment, or you want to go after the packet core environment. But it's also opening up new opportunities because packet core becomes so inexpensive. Well, could that be something that I offer at an enterprise level? Could it be something that I go out from a venue level, right? And we see this convergence of ideas going on that we haven't seen before. The other piece that's interesting that's beginning to pick up is the whole idea of NFV is going beyond the service provider into the enterprise. And so the large enterprise is beginning to pick up on this, not just on the SDN fabric of connecting, you know, things together, but the actual functions themselves, because now they can begin to take advantage of that, be it a hosted PBX and for communication in their world. All of a sudden that's a network function that's virtualized. Well, you know, that adds a whole new dynamic to it when we start taking a look at this and looking at new plays into the enterprise that they can do.
I guess in the same way that the industry expands and the traditional industry expands to cover the enterprise, a lot of other industries coming on board, the open software industry, you've got various bodies, organizations, technical committees, a lot of them doing similar things, maybe for different ends. How does industry ensure that it doesn't get swamped and duplicate work?
Well, what's interesting, and there are so many pieces that have to come together because of the way that the network touches everything, and the way that the network and the world of IT are, you know, integrating, right, converging. And so what that has caused is an interesting thing to occur in the NFV work here with ETSI, and I think it's just a unique opportunity for them to coordinate the standards that are needed, right? And in many of the working groups, if you go through the working sessions here, what you'll find is they're not just saying, well, we need to create that standard or create that specification. They're saying, we need that from, you know, OpenStack, or we need that from the NGMN, or we need that from 3GPP, right? They're defining things that they require from these groups, you know, standards and specifications. And what's interesting is it's taking all those pieces to come together, right? And this is more like a vortex or a focal point to integrate those capabilities. That's what's really interesting. In addition to that, it's not just about specifications. This group is about how fast can you get it to market. And the way you can get a fast instantiation of that is through the world of open source, right? So yes, OpenStack is good because that lays the foundation. That gives me a basis for it. But the whole work now that has spun off out of this into the OP NFV group, right? The open platform for NFV. You know, now we're beginning to have, you know, instantiation of the specifications in an open source code that basically it furthers and speeds up, right, the implementation of those specifications. And it's a great opportunity for those things to come together. It takes a bit of coordination, and that's what a lot of the conversation is here, a lot of coordination, not just in the working group sessions, but in between the sessions during the breaks, really, to coordinate what's going on.
Do you see this elsewhere in the telecoms industry? Because it sounds to me that what's happening with NFV is pioneering, it's changing possibly forever, the way these things are done.
Well, I think that's why I said I think it's unique. You know, as I looked at this work 2 years ago as it first came out, what became interesting about it, they weren't trying to define a new world and step over boundaries. They were trying to bring those boundaries together because they saw that convergence that was occurring, not just between IT and network, but you know, between the different groups that needed to occur or for this to be successful, right? All of that motivated not because of equipment manufacturers wanting to make more money, but because of the operators themselves wanting to reduce costs and to drive that service innovation faster. They needed to figure that out. They needed to figure out, how do I create an infrastructure that can quickly adapt to the needs of my, you know, consumers or my businesses out there? And they needed the agility of that infrastructure to go after it. And so that's you know, the whole play with innovation, what they're going after in this.
Fascinating. Well, Stephen Teitzel, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Glad to. Anytime.
Thank you.